Once, Alexander Chen, who seemed to be above worldly concerns, was in a down-and-out state. I lured him into my bed with a pair of hearing aids. He had always disliked women as ostentatious as me, but I particularly enjoyed taking off his hearing aids in bed, saying the words he loathed the most, and forcing him to do the most embarrassing things. Later, he made a comeback. The woman he had loved before and who had abandoned him also regretted it and came back. They announced their engagement. Afraid that Alexander Chen would come to his senses and take revenge, I immediately flew across the ocean. I didn't feel at ease in return until I heard that he already had a wife and a daughter. However, to my surprise, as soon as I got out of the airport, I was covered with a hand over my mouth and dragged into a car. That day, I begged for mercy until my throat went hoarse. But Alexander Chen took off his hearing aids and casually threw them out of the window. He gripped my waist and chuckled hoarsely, "Miss, it's no use. I can't hear you." Only a faint yellow nightlight was on in the room. Alexander Chen's handsome features took on a bit more allure under the light. I hooked my arms around his neck and lazily commanded, "Kiss me." Alexander Chen's eyes darkened, and he didn't hesitate to lower his head and kiss me. As our lips and tongues intertwined, the ambiguous sound of our kisses became particularly distinct in the silent room. I don't know how long it had passed. When I couldn't catch my breath and kicked his leg, Alexander Chen reluctantly released me. Our eyes met, and our breaths suddenly became scorching. His eyes were deep and dark, and he wanted to lower his head and kiss me again. But I dodged. "You came so late today. Were you held up by some girl?" I put on a questioning look. Alexander Chen's slightly cool fingers pinched the back of my neck, and his voice was still hoarse. "There was no girl. I've been negotiating with a business partner." "That's more like it." I kissed the corner of his mouth as if it were a reward. Alexander Chen turned his head and caught my lips, kissing me eagerly. His other hand had already started to tug at the strap of my dress. I pressed his hand. Being late is unacceptable. I turned and sat on the sofa, gently kneading his earlobe with my hand and whispering softly, "As punishment, you have to serve me on your knees tonight." As soon as the last word fell, I took off his hearing aids and casually threw them on the table beside us. Alexander Chen didn't like girls who were too bold, and he especially hated girls who were too open. Coincidentally, I was both bold and open. So I really liked taking off his hearing aids in bed, leaning close to his ear, and saying all kinds of explicit things. Anyway, he couldn't hear me after I took off his hearing aids. I had been coveting Alexander Chen for many years. During our school days, he was an unattainable lofty person, and he had a childhood sweetheart fiancée who was always by his side. During the day, I watched them go to and from school together longingly, and at night, I would pray to the gods, read tarot cards, and wonder when he would quarrel and break up with his childhood sweetheart. After we went to college, they were still in a good relationship, so I had to find a boyfriend who looked a bit like him to satisfy my longing. I thought I would never have a chance in my life, but later, Alexander Chen's family suddenly encountered a crisis. His father's business failed, and under the heavy pressure, he committed suicide. His mother witnessed his father's suicide by jumping off a building and suddenly had a heart attack and was admitted to the intensive care unit. Alexander Chen, who was away from home, rushed back in a hurry when he heard the news, but he had a car accident and lost his hearing ever since. His childhood sweetheart chose to go abroad with her parents at this time and didn't leave a single word. The former lofty person fell from the pedestal and was so down and out that he couldn't even afford a pair of hearing aids. When I heard the news, I immediately dumped my boyfriend, ended my vacation, and flew back home. Everyone thought I was going to redeem Alexander Chen. But I wasn't. I was going to take advantage of his misfortune. When I found Alexander Chen, he was in a small rented apartment. I threw a pair of hearing aids and several bank cards in front of him, and then typed a line on my phone for him to see. "Sleep with me, and all these will be yours." Alexander Chen looked at me, and there was no ripple in his eyes, as if he had already given up fighting against his miserable life. Even when we rolled onto the bed, I was still a bit dazed. The person I had been longing for day and night for so many years was now undressed and holding me, kissing me. Who wouldn't be dazed? Especially. I bit my lower lip and secretly glanced at him, sighing inwardly. I could endure that fake for so many years. I was really starved. "Are you uncomfortable?" Seeing me distracted, Alexander Chen thought his skills were not good. "No." I smiled and leaned close to his ear, whispering something that would make any decent person blush. His brows furrowed, and he suddenly leaned away from me a bit. Then I remembered that for those girls who confessed their love to him directly, Alexander Chen had always hated them to the core and was even stingy with a decent rejection. He should like those gentle and generous girls. I wasn't like that, but his childhood sweetheart was. Since he didn't like listening to me, then I just wouldn't let him hear. I reached out and took off the hearing aids on his ears that were already wet with sweat and threw them on the ground. I couldn't wrong myself. I touched Alexander Chen's abs and talked nonsense without any scruples. Over the past 4 years, Alexander Chen had been trained by me to be very obedient. When I hummed, he would know if I thought it was too light or too heavy, and when he occasionally didn't listen and did things according to his own will, he wouldn't cross my bottom line. The consequence of having a perfect bed partner was that I woke up late and didn't get to see the birthday surprise Alexander Chen prepared for me in person. I picked up the small box on the nightstand and gently opened it. Inside was a small silver ring. It had no extra decorations and was very simple. I carefully put the silver ring on my ring finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been custom made. I raised my hand and admired it in the sunlight with great satisfaction. It was only when the maid downstairs urged that the breakfast was going to get cold that I reluctantly retracted my hand. "Mrs. Brown, does it look good?" After I went downstairs to the first floor, I happily twirled around and stretched out my right hand to show off to Mrs. Brown. Alexander Chen gave it to me. "It looks good, it looks good." Mrs. Brown knew how much I liked Alexander Chen. She joked, "You didn't seem to like the bags, clothes, and luxury cars that Mr. and Mrs. gave you so much, but you really treasure this simple silver ring. It's different." I sat on the sofa, opened my phone, and refuted Mrs. Brown. "That's from Alexander Chen." A photo that popped up in my social media feed made me lose my voice. It was from Lisa, who was his childhood sweetheart and had a marriage contract with Alexander Chen, and whom I hadn't heard from for years. In the photo, Lisa was wearing a long dress, and her finger with a huge diamond ring was pinching a thin card. On the card was a touching love sentence. "When I think of you quietly, I find everything incredible." Behind her, Alexander Chen, who had gone out early in the morning saying he had something urgent, was turning his back to the camera and lowering his head to adjust his cufflinks. His profile was gentle. The caption was, "It turns out that even an iceberg can speak sweet words." Those brothers of Alexander Chen who had always looked down on me left comments one after another. "No wonder you didn't let us pick you up. It turns out that your sweetheart had already arrived. The lofty person has been won over by you. Our Miss Lisa is really amazing. I've been waiting for your wedding invitations for so long. Give us a definite answer quickly." Lisa replied to the last comment, "Soon. I'll ask Alexander to invite you to be the best man then." I stared at Lisa's huge diamond ring, which was as big as a pigeon's egg, for a long time. Then, I lowered my head and looked at the simple silver ring on my finger without any decorations. I don't know how long it had passed. A loud rumble woke me up. I turned my head and looked out the window. The weather had changed from sunny to cloudy, and it started to rain heavily outside. When Alexander Chen came back, I was still sleeping. The bed beside me suddenly sank a bit. He pinched my ring finger and gently shook it. "Mrs. Brown said you've been sleeping. Do you want to eat the pasta I cooked for you?" I didn't look at him and just nodded slightly. "Amanda." When I was burying my head in eating the pasta, Alexander Chen suddenly spoke up. "Why aren't you wearing the ring I gave you? Don't you like it?" I paused and replied flatly, "It's okay. It's just too plain." Actually, it was quite nice, but compared to Lisa's, it was really shabby. There was a complete silence in the room, except for the ticking of the clock. After a while, he said softly, "My new company is gradually getting on track. I'm currently negotiating a big deal. If it's successful, I can get a larger investment. Then I'll give you a better ring and buy you a seaside villa that you like." What did this mean? Was Lisa going to live in the Chen family's house while I lived by the seaside? Was he going to keep me as his mistress outside the house after getting married? I closed my eyes. Was this Alexander Chen's revenge after making a comeback? I treated him like a kept man, and now he was going to keep me as his mistress after getting married and not let me enter the Chen family. If he really succeeded, I didn't know what else was waiting for me. Remembering what I had done and said to him in bed, I shuddered. Early the next morning, as soon as Alexander Chen left, I quickly got out of bed and prepared to run away. Unexpectedly, as soon as I stepped on the carpet, my legs went weak, and I almost knelt down in a big bow. I cursed Alexander Chen in my heart and opened the closet, frantically stuffing clothes into the suitcase. "Miss, where are you going all of a sudden?" asked Mrs. Brown, who came up to clean. I didn't even look up, running away. I mean, going on vacation. I'm not sure when I'll be back. Before leaving, I grabbed Mrs. Brown and gave her repeated instructions not to tell Alexander Chen where I had gone. If he kept asking, tell him that I had gone abroad to get married and ask him not to harass a married woman. After giving all the instructions, I threw away my phone card, deleted all my social media accounts, and rushed to board the plane flying across the ocean. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. Mrs. Brown told me that Alexander Chen hadn't gotten married, but he already had a daughter. He turned out to be such a feudal person. I actually felt a bit sorry for Lisa. In the 21st century, he was still doing the thing of giving a formal status only after having a son. I didn't know how much suffering Lisa would have to endure if she married into the family. So much time had passed. Alexander Chen had become a new tycoon in the domestic industry, and he already had a wife and a daughter. He should have forgotten me long ago. So I didn't tell anyone and secretly slipped back home. However, as soon as I got out of the airport, I was covered with a hand over my mouth and dragged into a car. The man's embrace was hard and hot. His rough fingers rubbed against the silver ring I was wearing, and he let out a chuckle with an unclear meaning from his throat. Miss, didn't you go abroad to get married? What's the deal with still wearing the ring I gave you on your ring finger? After not seeing him for 5 years, Alexander Chen had changed so much that I could hardly recognize him. He used to love white shirts the most. He was clean and fresh, and when he lowered his eyelashes, he could exude a bit of innocence and purity, which fascinated me. Now, there were no more stray hairs on his forehead. He was wearing a black suit, looking noble and solemn, with a cold and stern expression. Just one look at him could make people's legs go weak. My ring finger was being constantly rubbed, as if a fire had been ignited from my knuckles and was gradually spreading. The temperature in the car kept rising. I curled up in the corner, not daring to breathe too loudly. Alexander Chen chuckled softly, and with one hand, he unbuttoned his tie and looked at me leisurely. Amanda, is your husband so poor that he can't even afford a decent ring? I couldn't stand his appearance of having made a comeback, having a beautiful wife by his side, and being so complacent. I retorted, I'm the sole daughter of the Smith family. Even if my husband were a nobody, I'd be able to help him make it succeed. You don't need to worry about it, Mr. Chen. As for the ring, I was in a hurry today and accidentally took the wrong one. Seeing Alexander Chen's increasingly gloomy expression, I chuckled. Mr. Chen, you don't think I still have feelings for you, do you? His hand that was gripping my wrist suddenly loosened, and I took the opportunity to open the car door and try to slip away, but I was pulled back again. Give me back the ring. Alexander Chen's voice was a bit hoarse, and his dark eyes were like a deep pool, suppressing boundless surging emotions. This is mine. I instinctively protected the ring. But he still wouldn't let me go and said calmly, Miss Smith can have any kind of ring she wants. This silver ring is too ordinary and doesn't match you. Please give it back to me, so that you won't take the wrong one again. Even when he was at his most down and out, he still bought the best ring for Lisa. Now that he had won back his beloved, he didn't even want to leave this simple silver ring to me. Looking at Alexander Chen's cold and solemn expression, my eyes became hot, and I gritted my teeth, took off the ring, and threw it into his arms. Here you are, go find someone who matches it. I, Amanda Smith, don't care about it. Without looking at him again, I shook off his hand hard and got out of the car without looking back. When I got home, a friend in my social circle called me and said that everyone had held a welcome party for me at the hotel and asked me when I would arrive. Looking at my still slightly red eyes in the mirror, I gritted my teeth and said, I don't want to eat at the hotel. I want to go to the bar and find someone to cook for me. Franklin took me to his own bar. The lights in the bar were chaotic. He casually pulled a hot girl from the dance floor into his arms and beckoned to me. Just tell me if you like anyone. It's my place, so don't be polite. I carried a glass of wine and wandered around for a while, then returned to the booth listlessly. Didn't you like anyone? Franklin had just finished kissing someone and looked satisfied. He rubbed the waist of the girl in his arms and joked with me. Miss, why don't you take a look at me? I'm rich, and I have a lot of experience in relationships. I will never let you be wronged. I was too lazy to pay attention to him, but the girl in his arms took it seriously. Mr. Foster, your wedding ring is so hard. It hurts me so much. You're such a delicate one. Franklin Foster casually threw the wedding ring onto the coffee table, gave the woman's lower back a hard pat, and said ambiguously, Is it still hard now? I couldn't stand listening anymore and got up to find another place. Before leaving, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Franklin Foster's wedding ring lying all alone among the nutshells and waste paper. I paused and said one more thing, put away the ring. Susan will be angry if she finds out. Franklin Foster lifted his head from the woman's arms and sneered. If she's angry, she can leave. Am I afraid of her? Since we're in the same social circle, it's not good to be too blunt. I said what I needed to say and didn't offer any more advice. I lifted my feet and left the private room that was already filled with ambiguous gasps. I found a slightly quieter place and sat there drinking alone. One person after another came to strike up a conversation with me, but I thought they all looked so unattractive that I couldn't bear to look at them. Amanda Smith. I don't know how long I had been drinking when a furious voice suddenly sounded. I raised my head in a daze and took a long time to recognize the person. Suddenly, I frowned and said, "You look so familiar." HMPH. The person sneered and pulled me into his arms. Take a closer look. Does it seem even more familiar now? I blinked my eyes that saw everything in a distorted way and blurted out, "Really? Handsome guy, you look just like my husband." Amanda Smith. How many husbands do you have exactly? He asked through gritted teeth. I pressed my hot face against his slightly cool chest and rubbed it, and sweet words just spilled out without any cost. You're my only husband. I don't want anyone else. I only want you. He seemed too lazy to talk more with a drunk person. He picked me up and walked outside. But I wasn't being obedient. My hands kept reaching into his clothes. I pinched here and touched there. In that short distance, Alexander Chen broke out in a sweat. Amanda Smith, if you keep groping around, I can't guarantee that there won't be any accidents. He covered my head with his coat and pressed me tightly against his chest, not allowing me to move. Since my arms couldn't move, I looked at the bobbing Adam's apple in front of me, blinked, and took a bite. When I was thrown into the car, I still hadn't completely sobered up from the alcohol, and I was completely dazed. The man leaned over me, lifted my chin, and started to kiss me passionately. As our fingers intertwined, our palms were damp with sweat. It seemed that the inside of the car also became damp, giving people an illusion of almost suffocating. Everything about me was controlled by the man in front of me. In the surging tide of passion, he was my only driftwood. I don't know how long it had passed, and even the car windows were covered with a thin layer of mist. I finally woke up completely and whimpered and begged for mercy. Alexander Chen, let me go. I can't take it anymore. I'm too tired. There were still a few beads of sweat hanging on Alexander Chen's chin, about to fall. Suddenly, he turned his head and took off his hearing aids with one hand, and opened the car window with the other. The hearing aids instantly flew out through that narrow gap. When the glass closed again, Alexander Chen tightened his grip on my waist, raised his eyes to look at me, and chuckled hoarsely, "Miss, it's no use. I can't hear you." On the first day I was back home, I almost died in Alexander Chen's car. When I woke up again, I was in a very strange place. There was the sound of running water coming from the bathroom. I wrapped myself tightly in the quilt and tried to find a piece of clothing to wear in the empty room. I couldn't confront him naked later. But the only pieces of fabric in the room were the tablecloth and the curtains. Just as I was hesitating whether to make do with them, the bathroom door opened. Alexander Chen, who came out of the bathroom, was dressed properly, but the ends of his hair were still a bit damp. "The clothes will be delivered soon. Just wait for a while." I hesitated for a moment and asked, "Did you buy the medicine?" Alexander Chen paused in the action of adjusting his tie, and then replied flatly, "Yes, I did." At this moment, I couldn't say a single word of what I had been preparing to say. I lowered my head and looked at the floor and let out a soft, The room was quiet for a while, and then Alexander Chen suddenly spoke again. "Between me and your husband, which one do you like better?" There was a lot of seriousness in his tone. Huh? I was confused for a moment and looked up at him blankly. "It doesn't matter if you can't tell the difference." Alexander Chen leaned down and slowly approached me, and said in a low voice, "It's easy to get bored with only one man around. Isn't it nice to have one more to change the taste?" The warm breath rushed straight into my ears. After understanding what he said, even my fingertips were tingling. Did Alexander Chen mean that he wanted to be my mistress? My earlobe was sucked and bitten gently. The man pressing on me was like a goblin, wishing he could devour me. After I came to my senses, I raised my hand and pushed him away hard. "Alexander Chen, are you crazy? You have a wife and a daughter, and you still want to be my lover? Ask yourself if you're worthy before doing anything." Alexander Chen's back hit the bedside table, and his face darkened instantly. "You say I'm not worthy?" The next second, he suddenly frowned again. "Amanda Smith, who told you that I have a wife and a daughter?" It turned out that there was no marriage contract between Alexander Chen and Lisa at all. It was just a joke between the elders of our two families when I couldn't even walk yet. Who knew Lisa would take it seriously? As for that post on social media 5 years ago, Alexander Chen directly unlocked his phone and handed it to me, frowning and saying, Lisa probably set the viewing permission. I've never known about this. That ring was for Aunt Song. At that time, my mother needed a lot of money for further treatment, so I borrowed some from Aunt Song. Later, when I repaid the money, I bought a piece of jewelry she liked and asked Lisa to take it back for her. I knew about Alexander Chen's difficulties 5 years ago. After I helped him bury his father, he refused to take any more of my money no matter what. At that time, I just thought he still wouldn't bend his proud backbone and was waiting for him to be broken by life. But in the end, he never took another cent from me. And that love sentence. Alexander Chen held my hand and said softly, it was the words I had prepared for a long time to confess to you. You said the silver ring was too plain, so I went to buy a nicer one that night and wanted to give it to you the next day. When I went to find you, Mrs. Brown said that you had gone abroad to get married. Alexander Chen opened the drawer of the bedside table. Inside, there were 2 rings and a small card lying quietly. The silver ring was as pure as snow, and the diamond ring was as dazzling as a star. The words on the card were still clear. When I think of you quietly, I find everything incredible. I clearly remembered how heavy the rain was that night 5 years ago. I also remembered how bitter I felt when I saw Lisa's post on social media. When Alexander Chen heard my indifferent words, the silver ring is too plain, he should have felt the same way inside. At that time, he had just repaid the money and given a gift to Lisa's mother. If he really hadn't been short of money, he wouldn't have said that, when I have money, I'll buy you a better one. Only Alexander Chen himself knew how many credit cards he maxed out and how much money he borrowed. Suddenly, I couldn't stop crying. I grabbed the corner of his clothes and apologized. I'm sorry, Alexander Chen. I shouldn't have run away without asking clearly and left you here alone. It's not your fault. Alexander Chen hugged me tightly and said in a low voice, I didn't do well enough, which made you misunderstand. It won't happen again in the future. I cried for a while, and then suddenly remembered something. You don't need to apologize for the misunderstanding. I wiped my tears with his clothes and said carefully, actually, I also made you have some misunderstandings. For example, Alexander Chen casually kneaded my earlobe, and his eyes narrowed slightly. For example, the fact that I'm not married. Before I could finish my words, I was thrown back onto the bed. The sad atmosphere in the room suddenly disappeared. My tears hadn't been completely dried yet. So Miss likes role-playing, huh? I sat on the bed and watched helplessly as Alexander Chen slowly unbuttoned his shirt one by one. He lowered his eyes and looked down at me, the corner of his mouth slightly curved. Today, I will definitely make sure you have a good time. Oh no, he's really angry. I crawled towards the door with my hands and feet. No, no, no. I don't like it. It's all a misunderstanding. Everything is a misunderstanding. Alexander Chen grabbed my ankle and dragged me back under him as I tried to escape. One burning kiss after another landed on me. He whispered in my ear, what misunderstanding? Is it the misunderstanding that you mistook me for your husband last night, miss? There was no way to escape. I closed my eyes, ready to face it like I was going to my death, and made one last struggle. Can you close the curtains? I was woken up by Alexander Chen's harassment. Have a sip of porridge before going back to sleep, okay? He let me lean against his chest and brought a spoonful of hot porridge to my lips. I don't want to. I opened my mouth, but the voice that came out was extremely hoarse. Damn it. I gave Alexander Chen, who was full of energy and in high spirits, a glare. He was calm and composed, as if he wasn't the culprit at all. Have the porridge first. You can scold me when your throat gets better. Before I could say anything, I suddenly heard a soft and waxy child's voice coming from downstairs. Daddy, Mom and I are back. Alexander Chen and I both looked in the direction of the sound. Lisa, wearing a gray suspender dress, was holding a little girl who was as round as a dumpling. The little girl was also wearing a gray little dress. They were dressed like a matching mother-daughter outfit. I looked at the gray home coat on Alexander Chen and sneered. What a warm and sweet family of 3. I don't know why Lisa is with Pearl, and I don't know why Pearl would call her mom. Alexander Chen quickly took off the coat on his body and kissed me on the side of my face. Don't be angry. I'll deal with it. Pearl Chen was the adopted daughter of Alexander Chen. I asked Alexander Chen why he adopted her. He was silent for a moment and then said, because she's very much like you. Amanda, you disappeared so suddenly. If I didn't give myself something to hold on to, I would die. If I hadn't come back, he would have planned to spend his whole life with this little girl who looked a bit like me. When I didn't know, Alexander Chen had already loved me deeply, even more deeply than I had fallen for him. I leaned against the railing and watched him scold his daughter. Pearl Chen, did you eat something given by a stranger again? When Alexander Chen put on a cold face, he was really intimidating. Pearl immediately let go of Lisa's hand and said in a small voice, "No, I only ate a little bit of cake." Lisa protected Pearl behind her and said softly, "Alexander, I'm not a bad person. Besides, Pearl is still a child. It's okay for her to eat a little cake." "Is Alexander something you can call him?" I was immediately annoyed and said lazily, "Miss Lisa, it's better for you, an outsider, not to say anything when we're disciplining our own child at home." Alexander Chen, who was about to speak, looked at me, who was almost killed by jealousy, lowered his eyes and smiled softly, and didn't say anything. As soon as Lisa looked up, her face changed instantly. "Amanda Smith? Weren't you supposed to be abroad getting married? Why are you in Alexander's house?" I glanced at her lightly and smiled. "Sorry, your plan didn't work out. Alexander Chen and I didn't stop seeing each other because of the misunderstanding you created." I raised my right hand and waved it. The silver ring on my ring finger sparkled brightly in the sunlight. "We're getting married soon. Please don't come to the wedding." She probably didn't expect me to be so straightforward. Lisa's face turned pale, but she was still trying to act calm. "I don't understand what you're saying, Miss Smith. Since you and Alexander are getting married soon, I'll just wish you a long and happy marriage here. But Miss Smith will have to put more effort into children's education in the future. After all, Pearl is still young and she's very averse to strangers." She bent down and asked Pearl, "Pearl, Daddy is going to find you a new mom. Are you happy?" Pearl blinked, took out a photo from her pocket, looked at it carefully, then looked at Lisa in front of her, and then looked up at me upstairs. Then, she suddenly opened her eyes wide and shouted at me, "Mom." I was stunned by this shout when I was just about to scold Lisa for even trying to deceive a child. When I came to my senses, Pearl had already rushed upstairs like a little cannonball, hugged my leg, and burst into tears. "Mom, you're finally back. Daddy and I aren't left behind children anymore. I became a mom without going through the pain of childbirth, and I got such a cute little daughter who was like a glutinous rice dumpling." My heart immediately softened, and I hugged Pearl, whose little face was red from crying, into my arms. "Pearl, don't cry. Mom is here." Lisa, who was downstairs, frowned and said, "Pearl, didn't you just say that I'm your mom? Why are you suddenly calling this other stranger mom?" Alexander Chen sneered, "Miss Lisa, you should know best why Pearl mistook you for Amanda." Pearl in my arms also held up the photo in her hand and stuck her head out. "This auntie looks just like Mom." Only then did I see clearly that the photo Pearl had been holding was of me. It was what I looked like 5 years ago. I had shoulder-length hair and liked to wear suspender dresses in the summer. Because I was lazy, I always wore light makeup no matter what occasion I attended. And Lisa's current outfit was almost exactly the same as what I wore 5 years ago. Lisa's thoughts were exposed, and she no longer had the face to stay there. At night, Alexander Chen was working in the study, and I was in charge of coaxing Pearl to sleep. Pearl couldn't keep a secret. She spilled out everything about her father like pouring out beans. "Mom, don't think that Dad is always cold. Actually, he's very vulnerable. He needs Mom's protection even more than Pearl does." Why? Alexander Chen didn't seem like the kind of person who could be associated with the word vulnerable at all. Pearl often sees Dad crying secretly while holding Mom's photo. Sometimes he even cries in his sleep. Dad worked so hard to find Mom. He takes a plane to far, far away places every week. Dad also asked Pearl to carry Mom's photo with me every day to look for you, but we just couldn't find Mom. Pearl held my hand, and her little voice was tinged with sobs. "Mom, please have pity on Dad. Don't leave again, okay?" My eyes and heart felt sour when I heard this. I quickly patted Pearl's back gently and said softly, "Mom won't leave. I'll stay with Pearl and Dad for the rest of my life." It was finally not easy to coax the child to sleep, and then I went into the study. Alexander Chen was still dealing with official business. He had a pair of silver-rimmed glasses on his nose, and the blue light from the computer screen was cast on his peaceful side face, creating a serene atmosphere. I didn't say anything. I walked straight behind the desk and hugged him from behind. Alexander Chen rubbed his face affectionately against my side face. "Is Pearl asleep?" "Yeah," I said in a low voice. "The little girl is very obedient. She's quite easy to coax." He didn't take it seriously. "She's only obedient in front of the people she likes." Speaking of this, I asked with some confusion, "Why does Pearl like me so much? And why is she so quick to accept that I'm her mom?" Alexander Chen turned his head and kissed me, then smiled and said, "Amanda, do you believe that even the mice in the Chen family would like you very much?" I gave him a glare. Who compares their own daughter to a mouse? Alexander Chen laughed silently and pinched my chin, sharing a long and deep kiss with me. After the kiss ended, he pressed his forehead against mine and said softly, because Alexander Chen loves Amanda Smith, so everything related to Alexander Chen also loves Amanda Smith very much. After the news that Alexander Chen and I were going to get married spread, our friends in the social circle sent their blessings one after another. There were also some people who couldn't wait for Alexander Chen and me to quarrel and break up. For example, Lisa. This was the 8th time Alexander Chen's phone rang that night. I glanced at him, and he immediately confessed everything obediently. It's a friend I haven't been in touch with for a long time. They said that Lisa is drunk and keeps insisting that I go and pick her up. Then are you going? Alexander Chen put his arm around my waist, and there was a hint of grievance in his voice. She doesn't have a husband herself, and she still harbors the delusion of making me lose my wife. She has ulterior motives. It's quite dangerous for a girl to drink too much at night. You'd better go. I gently twisted my wrist and smiled. I'll go with you. If she dares to try to steal my man, Alexander Chen, she should be prepared that her hoe isn't strong enough. When I walked in on Alexander Chen's arm, wearing high heels, Lisa was still being coaxed by all the men around her. Sister Lisa, stop crying. That Amanda Smith is just relying on her good family background. She's not as good as you in any other way. Yeah, we truly believe in our hearts that you're the sister-in-law. Alexander is just confused for a while. With her temper as a young lady, Alexander will definitely dump her before long. Goodness, did I, Amanda Smith, have such a bad reputation outside? I was just about to kick the door open when I heard a familiar voice. What kind of person Miss Amanda is isn't what you guys say. Don't talk nonsense if you don't know. It was Franklin Foster's fiancée, Susan. Then there was a burst of sneering. Monty, can't you control your woman? I think you're just like Alexander Chen. You're born with the fate of being played by women. You still treat Susan, that used goods, who was once with Franklin Foster, as a treasure. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? The sound of a wine bottle breaking and curses came out together. I pushed open the door of the private room at this moment. Monty was holding a cigarette in his mouth, holding a wine bottle that was half broken in one hand, and there was a man with blood all over his face under his foot. The room was in a mess. I looked around and smiled. Alexander and I came at just the right time, just in time for the most exciting part. Monty, long time no see. Alexander Chen stepped over the fragments on the ground and shook hands with Monty. Alexander, what do you mean? Monty just fought with our brothers for a woman. I looked coldly at the person who spoke. Was it you who said that Alexander Chen would definitely dump me and also called Susan used goods? The man panicked for a moment, and then shouted again, so what if it was me? What I said was all, I swung a wine bottle at him, and he immediately collapsed to the ground, covering his head full of blood and wailing. While lighting a cigarette for Alexander Chen, Monty pulled back Susan, who was eager to join in. Aren't you going to help? No need. Alexander Chen flicked the ash off his cigarette and chuckled. Let her have some fun. After dealing with all those gossiping people, I looked at Lisa, who was cowering in the corner, too scared to even breathe loudly. She looked at Alexander Chen with tears in her eyes and trembled as she pleaded for help. Alexander, save me. You still haven't sobered up after all this time. I casually picked up the wine on the table and poured it all over her, making her soaked. Then I smiled and asked, are you sober now? Lisa was like a drowned rat. Ignoring her own embarrassed appearance, she nodded frantically with a pale face. I said softly, I have to say, you're really smart, but not smart enough. No one has ever been able to take anything away from me, Amanda Smith, since I was a child. You won't be an exception either. If you really want to try to go head-to-head with me, I said meaningfully, our Smith family is willing to accompany you. Lisa let out a sob, but was immediately silenced by my gaze. I straightened up in satisfaction and looked at Susan, who had starry eyes and looked at me with admiration, and the two men who were smoking calmly. Miss Lisa is sober now. Let's go. Miss Amanda, you're so cool. Susan took my arm and shrieked, I want to marry you. Sure. I teased. Then you should break up with Monty quickly. Susan blushed. We're not together. I just came to give him something today. Give something? I glanced at the man with a cold expression beside Alexander Chen behind me and smiled. He's not a careless person. The streetlights elongated our shadows. Susan stepped on Monty's shadow and said in a low voice, he's really chasing me. But I haven't made up my mind yet. Is it because of Franklin Foster? At the mention of Franklin Foster, Susan's eyes immediately turned red. Yes, and no. I broke up with Franklin Foster. He told me to get lost and said that no one would like a woman as plain and weak as me. Miss Amanda, am I really that bad? There was a bit of confusion on Susan's delicate face. I held her hand and said softly, Susan, you're not bad at all. It's really bad to deny yourself just because of a man's words. Franklin Foster is a jerk. You've already wasted your precious youth because of a jerk. You can't let this jerk ruin the rest of your life. Trust me, you're more than worthy of Franklin Foster and Monty combined, like 18 times over and then some. And I leaned close to Susan and whispered to her, I heard that Monty can't perform in bed. Susan's eyes widened in surprise. I patted her on the shoulder and said firmly, with that in mind, aren't you more than worthy of him? When the news that Susan and Monty were together reached my ears, I was trying on my wedding dress. The maid was helping me arrange the skirt of the dress. I turned my head to look at Alexander Chen. Does it look good? There was undisguised amazement in Alexander Chen's eyes. He took my hand and led me to the mirror, smoothing my stray hair for me. You look beautiful no matter what. I was admiring the gorgeous dress on me when Alexander Chen suddenly bit me on the side of my neck. Amanda, Mr. Monty just called me. I smiled and dodged his kisses. What did he want? He said thank you for helping Susan sort out her feelings. In the mirror, Alexander Chen lowered his head and kissed the small mole behind my ear carefully. His voice was tinged with lust. He also said that he's determined to take the piece of land that I have my eye on. I didn't notice his strange behavior and frowned, asking, why? I don't know. When the maids had all left, Alexander Chen pinched my waist and pressed me against the mirror, his tone dangerous. Mr. Monty's reputation has been damaged. It's not appropriate to ask a lady about private matters, so he had to come to me to hold me accountable. Amanda, how do you know more about whether Mr. Monty can perform in bed than his girlfriend? My scalp went numb, and I finally remembered what I had done. I stammered, it's just a rumor. Everyone in the social circle says so. Susan, sister is sorry for you. Woo-woo. Alexander Chen rubbed my lower lip, and he smiled, not minding making trouble. Judging from Monty's tone, the rumor doesn't seem to be completely unfounded. Is he really going to bid against you? Alexander Chen's company was in a period of growth, and even a small error could have a huge impact. I worried. How about I ask Dad? My lips were suddenly blocked, and I couldn't spare any more thoughts to think about other things. I don't know how long it had passed before Alexander Chen released me and allowed me to breathe. An ambiguous strand of saliva was drawn between our lips and teeth. His hand reached behind me and slowly unzipped the hidden zipper. His voice was alluring. No need for Dad to intervene. You just need to make a little compensation. Extra chapter. As the words, please welcome the bride, fell, the door of the church opened with a loud noise. Amanda Smith was wearing a white wedding dress, with a smile on her face. The April sunshine in Spain behind her spilled onto her without reservation, making her look like a favored child of God. Alexander Chen looked at her with a smile. This was the girl he had been thinking about since he was 18 years old, the most dazzling pearl in the capital city, the only little princess of the Smith family. For more than a decade, he had tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep because of her. Now, his wish had finally come true. The first time he met Amanda Smith was at the opening ceremony of senior high school in grade 1. During the boring and long award ceremony, she burst in abruptly, wearing a bright short skirt. None of the school board members were dissatisfied. In fact, they even greeted her. Miss Smith. He understood. No wonder she was so bold. So she was the most gorgeous rose in the capital city, Amanda Smith. Alexander Chen didn't like ostentatious girls, but that dazzling color left a mark on his heart so arrogantly, and it hadn't faded over the years. When I think of you quietly, I find everything incredible. This was the first thing that came to his mind when he confirmed his feelings for her. He experienced all kinds of novel feelings for the first time because of a girl. Sweetness, sourness, restlessness, and also a sense of inferiority. For this proud and dazzling red rose, what could he do to make her look at him even just once? When he graduated from high school, Alexander Chen put a small note into the school's wish box. On it, he wrote carefully stroke by stroke, I want to lead the Chen group to break into the world stage, and I also want to marry Amanda Smith. In the year when he was about to graduate from university, his family suddenly encountered a major change. He became deaf in both ears and was disabled. He couldn't even afford a pair of hearing aids, and Amanda Smith also had a boyfriend. The dreams of his youth were shattered into pieces that year. Alexander Chen moped around in the rented apartment all day, and he even thought about death. Until Amanda Smith kicked open the door and threw a pair of hearing aids and several bank cards to him, asking him to be her bed partner. He looked at those words in silence and was actually glad that he still had some value in her eyes. In the 4 years that followed, while trying to revive the collapsed Chen group, Alexander Chen also served as Amanda Smith's obedient and sensible, kept man. Finally, after paying off all his debts, with the last bit of money he had left, he asked someone to melt down the longevity lock he had worn when he was a child. The longevity lock, which his parents had poured all their love into, was personally polished by him into a small silver ring, which he wanted to give to the girl he loved the most. When the confession he had prepared for more than a decade was about to come out of his mouth, she said that the ring was too plain. It was indeed too plain. How could the pearl of the Smith family wear such an ordinary ring? Alexander Chen went to a luxury goods store in the rain and maxed out all his credit cards to get a diamond ring. But Amanda Smith didn't wait for him. She went abroad to get married. Alexander Chen regretted it deeply. Why hadn't he been faster? Why was he so useless? In the 5 years she was gone, he lived like a walking dead. Only when looking at his adopted daughter, who looked a bit like her, could he suppress the thought of wanting to die. Until she came back, until all the misunderstandings were cleared up, Alexander Chen felt that he had come back to life. Losing something and then getting it back was a blessing from God. He had picked the only red rose in the capital city. Alexander Chen thought that no matter what, he would never let her go again.